we go through, in my life, they're associated with geographical moves. Like I said, Texas to New York City, and New York City to Germany. I could go on with that, but and how to manage those transitions, that's hard sometimes, and it's also difficult as a church. When we move from one sort of way of acting and to another, so for me, the Bible is not simply, and here I'm arguing with my mother. I grew up in a kind of sectarian group, right? So, but not just a blueprint, like we read it. There are these major transitions that we go through, and we did one in the 1970s about ordaining women, and my mother, she reads in there that women keep silent in the church, and she has her whole life. She has never said, she's a brilliant woman, but not in church. It's not what Scripture says. I think we'd probably forget how hard that transition was. I wasn't Lutheran then, so you'd have to tell me about the 1970s, but I hear about it, and we're doing another one. So, how does God help us? Is one of my main questions, make transitions that are hard, either in our personal lives or in the life. Now we're talking about the ELCA. That's how do you put that? How does a family fight well? That's a little delicate, but it's not real if we don't. We're not exactly the same, and so we see Luke doing that. See, I'm saying that there's a major transition going on, and Luke, quoting the Bible and quoting Jesus, and said, here Peter did this too. And I think Luke Acts is written to house churches that were having trouble taking in ethnic others. The question was about ethnicity. It was not about gender so much or about orientation in the first century. It was about ethnicity, but that's powerful already. So.
Like Norwegian and Swedes.
Well, or I've lived on the border between Germany and France, or I've lived in Israel between Israel and or I lived in Italy. Just Eastern. Well, I could say Africans and Italians. I've never lived in any place where there's not that kind of. In this case, we're giving examples of ethnic others that are just weird. How would they do that? But then learning to live together in the church, that's not easy. And Luke's writing to that situation. So, the conflict we're having is not unusual. It almost seems typical. There's somebody out there that's different from me and makes me nervous. I've never lived any place where that's not true. I'm bouncing around the world trying to pursuing my education. I've lived a lot of places. And even one time, when I'm in Rome, I volunteer in a kind of a soup kitchen, and there are all kinds of street people from Eastern Europe or Africa on the streets of Rome. And they come and eat, but those street people, Italians, they're not going to eat those Africans. That's a different roof. They're both homeless, right? But we are nervous about. That's just kind of my observation of us humans. We come out.
As you've lived in different places, have you felt the kind of reciprocal that someone has felt nervous about you? Have you felt that people are uncomfortable with you?
Oh, sure. So, in Rome again, there are Palestinians demonstrating in large crowds on the street. When, there's probably in the Middle East, a lot of Arabs in Italy. And, I'm a white North American. I don't get to, you're right, I feel nervous. Like in those demonstrations, I watch from a distance. I don't go down and mingle with the Arabs who are marching on the streets of Rome. I don't, or, try to learn Spanish. And, so for the first time in my life, I started to go south. I didn't quite go to Mexico, I went to Costa Rica, but I wouldn't be afraid on some of those streets, absolutely. As a white North American, sure. Yeah, so that works both ways, if I understand your point. But I want to also talk about, so I can trace, so, you know, that it's actually an adjective that's in Luke 4 and also in Acts 10. But there's a verb acceptance that I can trace through Luke Acts. And, you know, so if you know, this one occurs in only 2 places, but the verb, you know, Jesus starts down here, and here I'll relate this back to your that stunningly beautiful window on you know, on the Good Samaritan, right, in your chapel, you know. So Jesus, the way the Gospel of Luke's divided up, Jesus does this major trip through Samaria, exactly. You know, touched on by that window of the Good Samaritan. And so in chapter 9, the question is whether the towns of the Samaritans will accept him, you know, because he goes through that town. And then I'm just giving a couple examples. Then in the book of Acts, people, you know, the official church down in Jerusalem hears that the Gentiles have accepted Christ. That's in Acts 11:1. So when we're reading the history of the early church in Luke and Acts, why do some people accept Christ and some do not? You know, so the question is why. We're reading over and over again, these people accepted Jesus, these people did. Those people did not. And what I want to suggest is that there are 2 things going on. You know, one is ideas, and I've been in university my whole life. I like ideas. I like to teach graduate students, but the second thing is social political. Jesus is crossing a major social political boundary when he goes to Samaria. So he's not just talking about ideas. He's walking across a foreign border. So whether people accept that has to do with both the border crossing and the idea. And I think we should see them together. I think that's true in our own situations, why I emphasize it. You know, the idea that Christ died for all is a good idea, but maybe not for those folks, right? I mean, it's so every time that verb, you know, echomai, used to Luke Acts, these people accept them, but they're Samaritans and they're Greek women over and over again, you know. So there's a writer who wrote about this almost exactly the same time as Luke, a Jewish writer named Josephus. And I want to read a couple sentences from this writer contemporary with Luke, that is toward the end, after Jesus and after Paul, toward the end of that first century. Josephus is writing. And he rewrites the Bible. And, you know, in contemporary language, he does a new modern translation, and then he tells the rest of the history of the Jews. But while Josephus is doing that, he continues the history of the Jews, and he's telling about Alexander the Great. So he's moved all the way down to 300 years before Christ. And Alexander the Great, who's conquering the world. Alexander, as you know, goes all the way to India and conquers the world, he claims, from that, you know, that point of view. But when he's approaching Jerusalem, Josephus says he approached Jerusalem, and this is the story, right? I'm repeating the story. The people in Jerusalem bring out the book of Daniel to show Alexander the Great. And Daniel declares that a Greek should defeat the Persians. That's the way you can read Apocalyptic, the book of Revelation, New Testament, lots of ways, and you can read the book of Daniel lots of ways. But according to Josephus, they're showing him this book, and they show the great conqueror that a Greek's going to defeat the Persians. And Alexander the Great likes that, right? So they say, well, here's our prophecy that you're going to conquer the world, and we have a request that we can live according to our laws. You know, we can keep kosher. And so Alexander likes that, and he grants them the right to live by their laws. Then he goes up the story to visit the Samaritans, right? Exactly these same people. And when the Samaritans saw that this great conqueror, Alexander the Great, had been favorable to the Jews, they determined to profess themselves Jews. Josephus says, no, really, they're apostates. Apostate is a Greek word, they're apostates. And here, I'll read you a quote from Josephus. If anyone in Jerusalem is accused of eating things common, that is, not keeping kosher, or of having broken the Sabbath, or any other crime, he flies away to the Samaritans. See, so there are symbolic differences between us and them. We keep kosher and we keep the Sabbath, and those weird folks up there in Samaria, they don't. And they claim to be Jews when it's handy, when it's useful. And right now, with Alexander the Great, they're quite useful. So they claim to be Jews, but Josephus, the Jewish writer, says, really they're apostates. They're not one of us. He tells another story that's really quite similar that I want to go into, but let's see. How can I? This I don't quite understand, but when two ethnic groups are related to each other, there are often such symbolic differences. Here it's about, and we're used to conflicts about kosher food and stuff, but let me give the example of France right now in the 21st century. What's the big deal about whether a woman wears a burqa or not, It's her clothes, right? But in France, French and Arabs, I'm not trying to, but I'm just, that's not really a good exact definition, but there's a lot of conflict between secular French and Muslim women about what their clothes are. So the whole difference between the two can come down to a head covering, right? I mean, that's a little strange that we can put such power on one piece of cloth, but we do that. I'm going to give another example. It's not so flattering to me.
Stop for a second.
Yes.
But we put so much power in this symbol, the cross.
Yes.
And they could outlaw us hanging crosses from